CEO goes undercover as janitor to comfort girl. Mopping floors, she was hiding a painful secret. The city had long since fallen asleep, but the towering Lexicon Enterprises stood like a glass sentinel under the midnight sky, glowing faintly from scattered security lights. Inside its vast marble corridors, 19-year-old Maya moved like a shadow, her worn sneakers whispering against the floor as she dragged a half-filled bucket and a mop across the glossy tiles. She wore a loose, faded navy blue janitor's uniform that swallowed her frame, her hair tied up in a loose bun with strands falling across her tired eyes. The building's silence wasn't peaceful. It was loud, pressing, as though the walls themselves held their breath. Most nights were like this. Empty, cold, forgotten. Maya chose the night shift because people didn't ask questions in the dark. They didn't look at her too closely. They didn't see the way her eyes were always swollen from crying, or the way her hands trembled when she paused by the executive offices. It was safer this way. She'd learned to become invisible in plain sight. She swept and mopped and scrubbed while the world slept, while her phone remained stubbornly silent in her back pocket, a lifeline with no signal. Her route never changed. East corridor, elevators, executive wing, then back to the main hall. The rhythm gave her comfort, like routine could replace stability. But that night, something broke the cycle. As she rounded the corner toward the west hallway, she stopped abruptly. Someone was already there. A man in a matching janitor's uniform crouched low, scrubbing the floor with a quiet intensity that startled her. He looked up, offering a tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Name's James," he said simply, his voice low, calming. "First night." Maya hesitated, then nodded. "Maya," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tea." "Hey!" Returned to their work in silence, the only sound being the soft swish of water and the mop dragging across tile. At first, she was uneasy. She didn't like change. But James didn't ask her anything. He didn't speak again. He just cleaned. Still, she noticed his eyes on her occasionally, not in a threatening way, but gentle, observant. He saw things, like the dark bruises of exhaustion under her eyes, the way she flinched when a mop bucket clanged too loud, the way she stopped suddenly sometimes, standing still, clutching the mop as if her whole body was trying not to fall apart. He saw the way her sleeve brushed across her cheek quickly when she thought no one was watching, wiping away silent tears that escaped despite her best efforts to hold them in. Maya didn't cry loudly anymore. There was no time for sobbing, just quiet, restrained sadness, grief folded up neatly and hidden behind silence. James said nothing. He didn't ask why, but somehow his silence felt like understanding, not neglect. When her mop slipped from her hands and clattered onto the floor, she let out a small gasp and bent down quickly, but James was already there. He picked it up and held it out to her without a word, a soft expression on his face. "Careful," he murmured, and that was all. Maya took it, embarrassed, unable to meet his eyes. She waited for him to walk away, but he just returned to his work, as if nothing had happened. Something in her chest softened. She wasn't used to kindness with no strings attached. She wasn't used to being noticed without being judged. That quiet act, that small gesture, felt heavier than it should have. For the rest of the night, they worked side by side without another word. Yet the silence between them shifted. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with something unspoken. Not friendship, not yet, but maybe something human, something gentle. Maya didn't know who James really was, and he didn't know the weight she carried. But in the stillness of the night, between buckets and mops and tired eyes, something fragile began to form, a thread connecting two strangers through shared silence, and the sound of pain neither of them dared speak aloud. She went home that night with sore arms and heavy eyes, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely alone. The following nights passed quietly, yet something had shifted between them. Maya no longer felt the overwhelming ache of isolation while working. James had settled into the routine without asking questions or making unnecessary noise. His presence was steady, respectful, like a quiet rhythm that balanced out the heaviness in her chest. He worked beside her without interruption, sharing her silence without ever demanding a piece of it. He didn't ask about her life or why her shoulders sagged under an invisible weight. Instead, he matched her pace, helped her carry the cleaning supplies without a word, and sometimes nudged the mop bucket closer when she looked too tired to drag it further. Every so often, during their short breaks, he would disappear for a few minutes and return with 2 paper cups of hot tea from the vending machine downstairs. He never handed it to her directly, just left it on the edge of her cart, still steaming, and returned to scrubbing. At first, Maya hesitated to touch it. She stared at the cup like it was foreign, suspicious of the small kindness. But eventually, she began to accept it. She never thanked him out loud, but one night, she nodded after taking the first sip. He nodded back. It was their unspoken agreement. No questions, no pressure, just warmth, in whatever small form it could take. The bitterness of the tea didn't matter. It was the gesture that reached her. It made the cold nights a little easier to endure. Over time, her silence began to soften. Not entirely, but just enough. One night, as they worked on the executive floor to the soft glow of the ceiling lights, Maya broke the rhythm of her mop with a quiet voice. "She's in the ICU," she said, not looking at him. James didn't stop mopping. He simply listened. "My mom," she continued, barely above a whisper. "It's been 3 weeks now. Every day feels like I'm waiting for the last one." James kept his eyes on the floor, giving her the space to speak without the weight of eye contact. She appreciated that more than he'd ever know. "I finish here and go straight to the hospital. Sometimes I don't even go home," she added, gripping the mop tighter. "She doesn't always know I'm there." Her voice cracked and she went quiet again. James remained beside her, steady and still, as if anchoring her to the moment. He didn't respond, didn't fill the silence with empty words, and that was exactly what she needed. The rest of the shift went by without another mention of it. Maya felt a strange lightness in her chest. Not because anything had changed, but because she had finally let something out. Just a little. Enough to breathe. The next evening, she arrived at work like always, expecting the same lonely rhythm of pushing carts and mopping floors. But when she reached the janitor's storage room to collect her supplies, she paused. Everything was arranged, perfectly. Her mop was cleaned and hung on the wall. The bucket was filled with fresh water. Her gloves, usually crumpled, were folded neatly on top of a folded towel. But that wasn't what made her stop breathing for a second. On the top shelf of her cleaning cart, tucked between the disinfectant bottles, was a small envelope. Plain, white, unlabeled. She looked around instinctively, as if someone might be watching. The hallway was empty. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a cafeteria card. Hospital issued, prepaid. No name, no note. Just quiet, anonymous help. Her hands trembled as she held it. She wallowed hard, unsure whether to cry or laugh. No one had ever done something like this for her. No one had noticed she barely ate, or that she lived between fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. She didn't need to ask who left it. She knew. That night, as she pushed her cart through the hallways, she glanced toward James more than once. He never brought it up, never even looked at her differently, but something unspoken passed between them again. Respect, compassion, a shared truth wrapped in silence. Maya didn't say thank you. She couldn't. Not yet. But her eyes, a little less heavy that night, said enough. Rain lashed against the office windows that night, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and grey. Thunder rolled above the tall building like a warning, but inside the halls of Lexicon Enterprises, everything remained still, except for the steady echo of Maya's footsteps. Her cart squeaked faintly with every turn, her mop heavy in her hand, but her movements tonight were slower, more fragile. The quiet strength she usually carried had started to crack. She hadn't slept in 2 nights. The vending machine tea didn't come. James was there, of course, working quietly beside her as always, but even he could see something was different. Maya's eyes were glassy, her cheeks sunken. her posture slouched as if the weight on her shoulders had finally become too much to carry alone. At one point, she leaned against the wall, gripping her mop like a crutch, her breathing uneven. James said nothing, but he stopped working. He stood across from her, letting the silence speak. Then, suddenly, the dam broke. Maya dropped the mop. It clattered across the floor. She covered her face with both hands and sank to the ground, her body folding inward as the sobs came. Not the quiet tears she used to hide, but deep, aching sobs that she could no longer contain. "She's all I have," she choked out between gasps, her voice raw. "I'm trying so hard, but it's not enough. It even buy her medicines anymore." James didn't move closer, didn't reach out. He gave her space, but he didn't walk away. His presence was steady, anchoring. "I haven't eaten properly in 2 days," she added, curling into herself. "The hospital bills took everything. I don't know what else to do." Her words came in waves, each one more painful than the last. The kind of pain that had no outlet until now, until this moment. For a long time, James remained silent, not out of indifference, but because he understood that sometimes the heart needs room to empty itself before it can breathe again. Finally, he reached into the pocket of his uniform and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. No envelope, no label, just something handwritten, as if he had carried it for a reason he didn't fully understand until now. Without saying a word, he walked over and gently placed the note beside her on the floor. Then, quietly, he returned to his mop. Maya stared at the paper through blurred vision. Her hands trembled as she picked it up and unfolded it. Only 3 words were written, but they struck deeper than any speech ever could. "You're not alone." Her breath caught. The paper fluttered in her hand as she reread the words again and again. No one had ever said that to her. Not sincerely, not without expectation, not without judgment. These weren't words spoken out of obligation. They were offered like a lifeline. Maya pressed the note to her chest, her sobs slowly quieting into soft hiccups. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to thank him for saying exactly what she didn't even realize she needed. She remained on the floor for a while, her back against the cold wall, the sound of the rain outside echoing her thoughts. James didn't interrupt. He continued cleaning, giving her the freedom to feel without shame. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for her, even too. Ally, she stood up, unsteady but standing. She picked up the mop and resumed her work beside him, her face still damp, her heart still heavy. But something inside her felt different. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like she was collapsing in silence. That night, as the thunder faded into a quiet drizzle and the building lights flickered in reflection on the wet marble floors, Maya knew something had shifted. She didn't have answers. Her problems weren't magically gone. But there was a note in her pocket now, folded and safe. And beside her was a stranger who had seen her pain and didn't turn away. As Maya returned to her cart, wiping her face discreetly and silently resuming her tasks, James continued cleaning beside her, quiet, steady, and present. But beneath the surface, far more stirred inside him than the calm he wore on his face. Behind the janitor's gloves and faded uniform, he wasn't just James. He was James Callahan, CEO and majority owner of Lexicon Enterprises, one of the most powerful business figures in the city. The polished halls they mopped were his. The skyscraper they worked in bore the legacy of his decisions, his name printed in gold on executive doors. Yet there he stood, gripping a mop instead of a pen, exchanging silence for suits, humility for power. Few would believe it if they saw him now, and he preferred it that way. His decision to go undercover had not been driven by PR or strategy, it was personal. Months earlier, during a routine inspection, James had seen Maya from the observation deck. A janitor, mopping alone after hours, shoulders hunched, head down. There was something about her stillness that caught his attention. She looked like someone trying to disappear in a building designed to be seen, and he hadn't been able to forget her. Not after he noticed she was always the last to leave. Not after the surveillance footage showed her reappearing each night, quiet, alone, unnoticed by everyone. While other executives moved through life, with comfort and power, Maya moved through it like a shadow, barely acknowledged. It stayed with him. It gnawed at something buried in his conscience. He had built Lexicon to be a place of innovation and excellence, but beneath the glossy image, he suspected there were stories he didn't know. People like Maya, ghosts keeping his empire spotless while no one thanked them. That thought unsettled him more than any financial risk ever had. So, he made a choice. He shed his title, traded his tailored suits for worn boots, and re-entered his own company from the lowest floor, quietly, secretly, humbly. No cameras, no board approval, just a man seeking truth. The janitor's uniform fit awkwardly at first. His hands weren't used to calluses anymore. His back ached after long shifts. But in that discomfort, he found something real. And in Maya, he found something unexpected. Her resilience astounded him. She never asked for help, never looked for sympathy, yet the sorrow in her eyes told volumes that words couldn't. It shook him. The thought that she carried such weight and still showed up, night after night, to clean a place that gave her nothing in return. James had sat in boardrooms filled with ambition, ego, and greed. He had negotiated deals worth millions, built a reputation as a relentless strategist. But no negotiation had ever felt as real as mopping silently beside Maya. Her quiet strength haunted him. It wasn't just that she was suffering, it was the way she hid it, the way she still worked with care, the way she never complained. He had seen people with everything act like victims, but here was a girl with nothing, still giving the world her effort, her time, her tired hands. That kind of character couldn't be taught, and it humbled him. Often he wanted to ask her more, to offer her help openly, but he knew too well what pity could do to dignity. So instead, he watched. He listened. He offered small kindnesses. And now, after watching her break down and somehow still find the strength to stand again, James knew he'd been right to follow his instincts. Maya wasn't just another worker. She was the reason he had come down from the top floor. The pain she carried reminded him of something he had long forgotten, that power meant nothing if you didn't use it to lift someone else. Tonight, as the storm outside faded into silence and Maya quietly worked beside him again, James didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a man rediscovering the value of being human. And behind the broom he held, a promise began to form inside him, a silent vow to not let her story go unseen. It had been a week since the storm, a week since Maya had crumbled in front of James, and a week since his silent note had anchored her when she felt like drifting away. She had shown up each night afterward, expecting to see him in the same hallway, pushing the same mop, sharing the same silence. But he never came back. Night after night, his absence became heavier. At first, she assumed he had fallen sick. Then she wondered if maybe he had been reassigned. A deeper part of her feared he had simply left, like everyone else. Still, she kept checking the janitor's storage closet each shift. She kept glancing down the west corridor, hoping to hear the faint rustle of his mop trailing behind. But it was always just her. Until the 7th night. She walked into the janitor's room just after clocking in. The lights flickered softly overhead. Her cart was where she left it, but there was someone standing beside it. A man in a dark uniform. Security. He held a sealed envelope in his gloved hand, his expression unreadable. "You're Maya?" he asked. She nodded slowly, heart suddenly uneasy. Without another word, he handed her the envelope and walked away. Maya stood alone in the room, staring at the thick white paper. Her name was written on the front in neat handwriting. No stamp, no return address, just her name. She sat down on the bench near the lockers, hands trembling. As she peeled open the seal, her eyes dropped to the first line, and the breath left her body. "Maya, I'm not who I said I was." She blinked, reading it again, not fully understanding. The words blurred slightly as her hands tightened around the page. "I'm the CEO. I wanted to know the stories behind the tired eyes that keep this place alive. Yours moved me the most." The air in the room felt thinner. Her pulse quickened. She kept reading. An apartment has been arranged for you. Your mother's hospital bills are now covered. Her knees buckled, and she dropped the letter to her lap, her fingers flying to her mouth in disbelief. A sound escaped her, not a sob, not a scream, just a breath full of every emotion that had been trapped inside her for weeks. Her eyes flooded, but not from despair this time, not from fear, from something else, something warm and unexpected. Gratitude, overwhelming, unshakable gratitude. She picked the letter back up with shaking hands and read the final line. I hope one day you forgive the lie. James Callahan. The name hit her like a wave. James. Not just James, James Callahan. She had mopped floors with the owner of this entire tower. The man in gloves and old boots had been sitting on top of the very world she scrubbed each night. Yet he had bent beside her. He had listened. He had cared. The tears came faster now, but they were different. They weren't heavy or bitter. They were light, cleansing. She laughed softly through them, unsure whether to cry harder or smile. The mop, the tea, the silence, the man who simply sat beside her through pain he didn't pretend to understand. It all made sense now, but it also didn't. Why her? Why would someone so powerful go through such trouble? For her. The letter didn't answer that. It didn't need to. Because in his quiet way, he already had. He had seen her, not as a cleaner, not as a forgotten HT worker, but as a person, a soul doing her best to survive. And he had chosen to act. Maya pressed the letter gently to her chest, her breathing slowing. She wasn't sure what her life would look like from this point forward, but one thing was certain. Something had changed forever. Not just her circumstances. Her hope. The lobby doors slid open with a quiet hiss as Maya stepped inside, her reflection catching momentarily on the polished glass before disappearing behind her. She clutched a small canvas bag to her side, her ID badge clipped neatly to the lapel of her blazer, something she never thought she'd wear in this building. The marble floors still shined, the elevators still hummed, and the morning air carried the same scent of fresh paper and coffee. But everything felt different now. Not because the building had changed, she had. No longer in janitor blues, Maya wore a crisp white blouse tucked into tailored pants, her shoes clicking gently across the floors she once mopped in silence. She walked past the hallway she used to clean, now heading not to the janitor's closet, but to the 7th floor, community outreach. Her new department, her new beginning. The role had been created weeks ago, right after the letter. She hadn't expected it. She hadn't even known how to respond when the HR call came. But after hesitation and a long conversation with her mother, now stable, now recovering, Maya had said yes. Yes to the chance. Yes to herself. She had learned enough to know that second chances don't always come with fanfare. Sometimes they arrive quietly, like a folded note, or a new badge, or a man sweeping floors beside you in silence. Now, as she stepped off the elevator onto the main floor, a rush of memories met her. The long hall, the echo of wheels from the mop bucket, the vending machine at the corner. And there, waiting at the far end of the corridor, stood James, not in janitor clothes, not hiding anymore. He wore a clean-cut navy suit, no tie, hands tucked gently in his pockets. But his face was the same, still calm, still kind, still carrying that same soft steadiness that had once helped hold her together. Maya approached slowly, her heartbeat skipping in an oddly familiar way. James smiled first, just a small, thoughtful curve of his lips. I wasn't sure if you'd come, he said gently. I wasn't sure if I was ready, she replied, her voice steady now. But I think I am. He nodded, eyes warm. I wanted to see the girl who changed the way I lead. Maya looked around the space, her eyes brushing over the floor, the lights, the walls that had once held her silence. Then back at him. And I wanted to thank the man who saw me when no one else did, she said. For a moment, they stood in a stillness that wasn't awkward, but full of memory. full of meaning. She didn't see a CEO anymore. She saw James, the man who had knelt beside her pain without needing to fix it, who had handed her tea without asking questions, who had quietly listened until she found her voice. He didn't have to say more. She understood everything now. And he saw her, not as a charity case, not as a symbol, but as a human being who had walked through fire and still stood tall. They turned and began walking slowly down the hallway together, side by side. No mop, no secrets, just a shared truth between them. Along the wall, a small plaque had been installed, in honor of those who work in silence. Maya paused, reading it with glassy eyes. James said nothing. He didn't need to. That space, once cold and silent, now held meaning. It held her story. A story not of pity, but of rising. Not of rescue, but of recognition. At the end of the hall, James gestured toward a sunlit room, her new workspace. "It's yours now," he said. Maya looked at him, her lips curving into a slow, genuine smile. "No," she replied softly. "It's ours." And for the first time in her life, Maya walked forward not as someone cleaning footprints, but as someone finally leaving her own